evening and welcome to Bronx Talk. Earlier this month, the Bronx Financial Access Coalition, that consists of 4 long-standing Bronx community housing organizations, along with Webster Bank and the expansive vision and steady diligence of the Lower East Side People's Federal Credit Union, opened the Bronx People's Federal Credit Union on Intervale Avenue. It's a moment in time that not only restores quality and convenient banking services to the South Bronx, but also sends a signal that affordable and quality financial services are now accessible to people who are often targeted for more expensive financial services. So tonight we're going to discuss not only the coalition and the details of this extraordinary development to serve an historically underserved community, but how this concept might be applied to other Bronx communities to build wealth and not debt. So please join me in welcoming the Policy and Campaigns Advisor at Banana Kelly Community Improvement Association. And this evening he's also representing the aforementioned Bronx Financial Access Coalition, my friend Gregory Jost. Nice to see you, Greg.
Good to see you again, Gary.
And a board member of the aforementioned Lower East Side People's Credit Union, the Associate Director of the New Economy Project. It's Andy Morrison. Welcome to Bronx Talk.
Thank you for having us on.
Greg, let's just start with you and let's back it up so people understand what we're dealing with. What is the Bronx Financial Access Coalition? Now, I'll give you the names. You know who they are. It's Nostradamus, Wedco, Banana Kelly, and UNHP. But what's the deal here? What did they do? What do they do?
Yeah, so we're all, like you said, we're community housing organizations, and a lot of our roots come from working on issues of redlining, like fighting back against redlining and for community reinvestment. And a lot of the early reinvestment was about getting money into housing, because we know getting housing, not just getting housing built, but maintaining it requires ongoing investment and reinvestment. And when the banks were not just making loans, but closing branches in our neighborhoods, our organizations organized to ensure both, right? That dollars flow into our neighborhoods in ways that build up our residents and build up our housing and keep it affordable. And also to make sure that we have branches. And sometimes that's in the way of like trying to keep a bank branch open. But oftentimes the banks are, they're like, well, this, for whatever reasons, often related to the people living in our neighborhoods, they say, we don't want to keep this branch open. It's not profitable for us. And they close it. And in those situations, there have been a few examples or times where we've been able to use that to leverage opening up a people's-led financial institution.
Which is where we're at today.
Exactly.
I don't want to make assumptions for people, and I know the notion of redlining, and we're going to talk about a little later about that you're writing a book and all that, but maybe you should define that term so people, and I think when you do define it, people in the Bronx will say, oh yeah.
Because we all live it, right?
Yeah,
we live
right.
it,
So explain what it is,
Yeah.
and then, so we can move forward.
Yeah, it's just, basically it's this idea that for financial institutions, and there can actually be like what we might call public sector redlining, which is when government writes off, it's really just the writing off of a neighborhood and saying that this neighborhood is not worth the money. We had planned shrinkage back in the day in the Bronx, right? Where they were like, let's pull out the resources here from a government side. But that really started in the financial sector as well, where banks and insurance companies would literally look at the demographics of a neighborhood and say, because there is a quote unquote infiltration of undesirable people into this neighborhood, we don't think the future prospects of this area are worthwhile and worth investing. So it became, in many ways, a self-fulfilling prophecy, because once the banks pulled out their investment and insurance companies stopped making policies there, then of course, right, then the landlords stopped making repairs. They sold their buildings. The responsible landlords sold their buildings to speculators, and then hence we all know what happened.
The gentrification, etc. I have to say, having sat in the seat for all these years, when you described it, my stomach started to churn. I said, this is not the core of a problem, but a core of a very, very big problem. This coalition was organized around branch closures between 2019 and 2021.
Yeah.
So while you can go back in history, it's also a very current issue.
Yes, it's been happening for decades. And it'll happen in cycles and waves. And we saw even right before the pandemic, there was a new wave of branch closures. And we approached a number of different banks. And the one that was responsive to us was Sterling Bank. And Sterling Bank, one of the reasons banks, might be more open to discussing is if they're looking at a future merger, or they need to get approval from their federal banking regulatory agency. Plus, they also had some good people working there, right? So it's a combination, right? We had some good people on the inside. Sterling was interested in they were about to apply to merge with Webster Bank, which is based in New England,
and was participating in this particular
Well,
project.
then we met with them, and they were super responsive. And what was really great about our meetings with Webster Bank at that time, Sterling, I should say, leading into Webster, was that they listened to us as
opposed to the other banks that
we're like, yeah, we're good. Yeah, we don't need to talk to you, or we know what's best for your neighborhood.
I want to introduce this concept with quotes from a couple of your members, which we have. The first one we have is from Jessica Clemente, a friend of yours from Nos Cadamos. She said, the grand opening of the Bronx People's Federal Credit Union is a bold step forward in community-led banking, education, and empowerment. We are not just creating a new financial institution, we are reclaiming our right to accessible, equitable banking, a right long denied to communities that have been historically redlined and disinvested. Community-led solutions have always been at the forefront of our revitalization, and they will continue to guide our journey toward economic justice. I'm sure people in the Bronx can really relate to that.
Yes.
The other quote that we have came from my buddy Devon Russell from Wedco, and he said the opening of People's Federal Credit Union's first physical branch is a true testament to the power of community collaboration and reinvestment.
Yes.
That leads us to our friend Andy Morrison. Talk about the Lower East Side People's Federal Credit Union and why the opening of the Bronx People's Federal Credit Union fits into the scheme of what you work on.
Yeah, so the founding of the Bronx People's Federal Credit Union really mirrors what happened on the Lower East Side in the mid-1980s when the
That's fascinating, by the way. Go ahead.
Yeah, when the last bank branch shut its doors in the neighborhood, it left residents without access to critical financial services. So, yeah.
This is going to come up. Define those financial services. What are critical financial services?
Everything from loans, for a mortgage, for a small business, to everyday financial services, a checking account. So you can, have a place to put your paycheck without having to go to a check casher that's going to charge you an exorbitant fee and extract wealth from it. Yeah, and there's so many other versions
and the
of
higher
it.
fees,
Exactly.
which make it more difficult for people, many people in our neighborhoods. Go
Right.
ahead.
So the neighborhood was left without access to these financial services, and residents banded together and they formed the Lower East Side People's Federal Credit Union.
What year was it?
1986.
86. So
Yeah.
It goes back a ways.
And so we're seeing that same spirit of resilience and self-reliance here in the Bronx, with community groups coming together to, not waiting for big banks to step in, not waiting for the government to get its act together, but taking matters into their own hands. And we're just really proud to be a part of that at the Lower East Side.
Because it makes sense for what you've been through.
Exactly.
I think it's interesting and instructive for me, and I presume for people who are watching, that the same thing happened in the Lower East Side that has happened and is still even
Right,
happening.
and
in the Bronx.
I live a few blocks away from the Lower East Side branch, and the picture remains the same. The Lower East Side continues to be the branch in that neighborhood that is actively serving that community.
You sent us a map, and we're going to put that map on the screen. I want you to describe what you think is significant about it.
Yeah, what you're looking at, so the star that's shining bright on the map is the new branch of the Bronx People's Federal Credit Union. And you'll see around it is a high concentration of check cashers and licensed pawnbrokers.
That's what those dots, the red dots are?
Yes, and then you'll see the relative absence of bank branches in the neighborhood. And this is essentially the redlining that Greg was defining before, depicted visually on a map.
Wow, it is absolutely fascinating. Greg, you were telling me earlier, and we've talked about it before, this idea of a mobile unit was almost the first installation, if you will. It's not an installation, it's a mobile unit, of this concept. It's still available.
Yes.
And what did it teach you about this process?
That's a great question, Gary. So one of the reasons that we started this partnership with Lower East Side is because we knew they had a mobile branch van. And Lower East Side has expanded. One of their expansions, recent expansions, was to the North Shore of Staten Island, which was another neighborhood that redlined and underserved. Similar situation. And they were then using that to then lead into opening up a physical branch there a few years ago. So we said, hey, would you be willing to do this partnership with us as these 4 longstanding Bronx housing organizations to bring the mobile branch to our neighborhoods where there are very few branches for the most part, into different pockets, and just start to reach out and start having conversations with people. One of the biggest lessons, which we kind of knew, but this reinforced it for us, is that it takes time to build trust with people, especially with people who've had bad experiences with the banking industry.
Right. So you say, here's a mobile unit, and they're like, well, I don't know that
How is this different than me going to Bank of America or to Chase, right? And some people still had, they owed some of these big banks money because they were charging them these monthly fees, maintenance fees. They didn't have the minimum balances. And so now, even though they had money on deposit, the banks were trying to they're like, actually, no, you're in debt to us. And so what was really great is that we were able the staff from the credit union was able to work with some of the local residents and help them resolve some of those issues. And then they could put in just a little bit of money to get their account started. We used some of the funding from Webster Bank to offer people a bonus when they signed on. Now, if you look at some of the big banks, they'll tell you get something in the mail and they're like up to a $5,000 bonus. That's if you deposit $250,000. We're saying as long as you have $25, we'll give you $50 for signing up.
Stupid question, and I'm going to ask you both this stupid question. The value of community creation of these things can't be understated, right?
The trust.
And Andy wants to, go ahead, Andy, jump in.
No, I just want to, I mean, this is it's a financial cooperative. When we talk about credit unions, we mean a financial cooperative. And that means that the credit union is owned by its members. So with a bank, it's owned by shareholders. It seeks to maximize
and
profits.
Those shareholders
they want profits.
And they could be anywhere. They're not.
Right.
They're certainly not from Intervale Avenue.
Right. The credit
generally.
Union, the credit union's accountable to the people who rely on its services. And so that just creates a very different type of relationship that's based on mutual aid. And so what we're seeing is that a credit union can provide all the services that a bank can provide. It's just as safe, but what's happening is your deposits as a member of the credit union are helping to fund your neighbor's loan, and his or her deposits are helping to fund your loans. And so that could be for a mortgage or a share loan in an affordable housing co-op. And that's how we build wealth in a community, because the credit union is not making profits, it's reinvesting its earnings back into the neighborhood, helping everyone thrive.
Why this spot? Why the center of that map that we saw? What was it around that neighborhood that you said, you know what, this is where we ought to do it? I don't know who's best.
Yeah, I'll jump in. It's actually located in a building that Banana Kelly got through a program with the city. If you remember, a few years ago, the city was running something called the cluster site program, where they were converting buildings into kind of makeshift shelters. It's not a very well-run program. It was causing a lot of issues. It was displacing a lot of longtime residents. So we were able to get this building. The city acquired it, handed it to us to do the renovation. So the building was recently renovated, including the commercial spaces as kind of nice little vanilla boxes to be occupied by uses that are positive for the neighborhood. And so when we were talking with the credit union about potential locations, we're like, hey, we have this small location for a first kind of satellite branch welcoming into the Bronx. And this is a neighborhood that has not had any branches for decades.
Can you imagine, for everybody, can you imagine living in that circumstance where maybe you got to go to work downtown and use a bank there, or travel somewhere, or again, the check cashing places, which we'll talk about in a moment. The role, you want to add something?
Yeah, I just want to say, in addition to what Greg's saying, at the Lower East Side People's Federal Credit Union, we have branches in East Harlem. We have a branch on the North Shore of Staten Island, and now a satellite branch in the Bronx. That's because these are the neighborhoods we want to serve. We specialize in serving low-income communities, immigrant communities, seniors, and we take a high touch where we're really working with people, providing the kind of financial counseling people need, tax prep services, along with the accounts that have low or no fees, low interest on the loans you provide. And again, that's because we're owned by the members. We're responsive and accountable to the membership.
I got a list here, which was from some of the literature you had sent. Fees and interest are kept to a minimum, free checking accounts, credit builder loans, fee-free ATMs in McDonald's restaurants, deep discounts on City Bike, which is also a very, very important thing, an open field of membership for low-income New York City residents. I mean, this is what it's about. What's the role of Webster Bank in this?
That's a question for Greg.
I'll share.
I don't know
We try to
which
keep
way.
a little bit of distance between the bank and the credit union. That's all. And that's where the Financial Access Coalition, the Bronx Financial Access Coalition comes in. So they're sponsoring us as these longstanding neighborhood institutions to play this kind of like almost brokering role. Like we're welcoming our members, our residents, our clients, our everybody, anyone affiliated with us, our staff, our volunteers, into this relationship with the credit union.
And
to be
so
clear,
that says something good about Webster Bank, that they understand a larger picture than just their own investors.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just to be clear, the branch is a Lower East Side it's a branch of the Lower East Side People's Federal Credit Union. So we have the North Shore People's Federal Credit Union, Lower East Side, East Harlem, and now the Bronx People's Federal Credit Union. And we hope to have more.
What's the problem, Greg? You and I were talking about it briefly on the phone. What is the problem with check cashing places? Now, people say, well, wait a minute, that's what I do. Why do I need, and you said there's still some hesitation about, using a new system.
Well,
why is this a better system than just going and checking the cash?
Right. So I think that comes back to the build wealth, not debt, right? Like check cashers are convenient, but they're not necessarily affordable, right? And so they don't work with people. I think one of one of our values that we hold, right, is that we shouldn't have a two-tiered financial system where some people have access to banks and other people are kind of relegated to these what we would call alternative financial services that are higher cost, nickeling and diming people, right? And
so it really costs people more than it would at the credit union to do that.
It's a high cost of being poor in this country, living paycheck to paycheck, right? People who are living on that bubble, on that edge, are often targeted for high cost products because they feel like maybe they're desperate, they don't have access to the other things. And the perks are usually set up for people who already have a lot of wealth.
I do want to give you a chance to talk about you writing a book about, kind of this whole process. Give us an idea of what you're writing about redlining, and how does that play within this dialogue?
Well, just that this is a long-standing piece, and it's a kind of a worldview and perspective. And I would say that one thing that's the name of the forthcoming book is Inside the Red Lines, because it's told from what is it like redlining is something that's done by people on the outside who have a lot of power in industry, right? But for those of us who live inside the neighborhoods, we have a totally different perspective on what makes a neighborhood great, right? Like the South Bronx in the 1930s and 40s, just as it was being redlined, we were just talking about doo-wop, right? Producing doo-wop and jazz and all these like art forms coming out of the neighborhood. That's an amazing neighborhood at the time. But to outside valuators, they don't see that worth and value.
They saw people of color, frankly,
But we know that we have everything we need in our neighborhoods. We're the experts. We have it's such a great place to be. Just riding the bus on in the Bronx, you see all these amazing things happening, and the resilience and determination and life of people in the Bronx is a beautiful thing.
You were telling me that there is a legislative agenda, because if there are things that can be done in the state or the city to make it easier, do you want to talk about it? Let's see, it's the End Loan Sharking Act, ELSA.
Yeah,
is what
that's
it's
right.
called.
Yeah, here's another unique thing about the Lower East Side People's Federal Credit Union is that we have a mission, and that mission includes advancing policy reforms that will meaningfully benefit our members. And one of the policy initiatives we're behind, along with New Economy Project where I work, is the End Loan Sharking Act. And what it would do is strengthen New York's usury law, which caps interest rates on loans to ensure that we don't have payday lending and other forms of high cost lending that strips wealth out of neighborhoods. And this bill would kind of modernize our usury law to preempt some financial technology companies that are working to evade the law so that they can bleed people through these apps that offer short-term loans.
So people who see it and then may think they're getting a good deal, maybe they're not really getting it.
They market it to people who are having a tough time getting from paycheck to paycheck. And what happens is people take out small dollar loans that are due in 7 days, and they pay exorbitant fees. And they even induce people to tip these companies.
Really? Wow.
It's
hard enough tipping the people who really deserve tips.
Right, to siphon money. But again, they structure it this way to evade the law.
This is a state law. Now, I have the list that the assembly members who are behind it from the Bronx are Chantel Jackson, Udelka Tapia, and Amanda Septimo. We can give them a shout out. Is this going to get lost in the budget discussion, or are we going to wait till after the budget is done and then get this
That's
through?
usually how it works in Albany. You got to wait till the budget's done, and then legislators
or have it be part of the budget discussion, and
yeah.
that's why they can't pass the budget. Greg, you also mentioned, I gave it the EWALA, which is the Earned Wage Access Licensing Act, but you say this is not a good idea, and that's on the table also in Albany.
Yeah, on the flip side, right, from what Andy was just sharing about, is that the financial tech industry has been pushing a bill that would kind of make these kind of apps that are basically payday loans, but they don't want them to be called loans. It's kind of it's a pretense, right? They're pretending that they're not loans in order to get a carve out from the usury cap. So then they would be able to legally make these very high cost loans in New York State. It's very dangerous for everyone in the state, because then it can usher in this era of, now we're going to have payday lending in New York.
And you know, you characterized it earlier by saying, okay, you know, here's $5,000, but in order to get it, you've got to invest a ton, and that's also part of this.
Yeah, or it's like a $100 loan turns into $5,000 in debt pretty quickly. The APRs can be 800%.
Which is what a lot of the student loans are about. I could tell you that firsthand. That's another story. Let's just get into can this be duplicated? Is this the only neighborhood in the Bronx or in New York City that can get it? And if it can be duplicated, who does it? Is it the same coalition?
Yeah.
Do neighborhoods have to form it? Like, what's next steps for this, so that this concept, which seems healthy, can be spread? Of course, our interest is the Bronx, but other neighborhoods in New York.
Yeah, I think one of the other lessons that we learned over time in the Bronx and the organizing and some of the research that I've done is that, and just from talking to my other friends who are working on these projects, it's very hard to start a brand new credit union these days, unfortunately. But
look at all the partners you needed in order to do this. I mean, you got Webster Bank, you got them, you got your 4 groups. It's a thing.
And we're working with folks who are the experts in running a credit union. Like, our expertise as housing and reinvestment organizations is housing and reinvestment. And so we understand that need. And so by partnering with Lower East Side peoples, right, we see there's an avenue to expanding into more Bronx neighborhoods, because there's a lot of need. There are a lot of neighborhoods.
Do you
where
look at
branches have
neighborhoods
closed.
now and say, because you're working with a coalition that serves a number of different neighborhoods, are you looking at, do you want to drop a hint?
Sure. I mean, we're definitely looking also at the West Bronx. We do the mobile branch often with UNHP. We've done it on West Tremont, and with Wedco, we've done it over by 167th Street, 168th, like around that side too. So that kind of West Bronx corridor as well. And then we've taken it a couple times into the Northeast Bronx as well, another neighborhood that's long been
Well, when
redlined
you
as
say
well.
taking it, but
That's the mobile branch.
The mobile branch.
Yes.
Yeah.
But this is how we test it out in neighborhoods and see what's the reception. And is this a place where we want to, can we work with local partners? Because that's the key also, because we want to come in with the local neighborhood partnership,
of course, so
people who know what's happening on the ground.
Andy, what your thoughts on expanding it? And now you've already expanded, you've been through this process. How do you view that whole in the future thing?
Well, I think, as Greg said, the key is to have good partners on the ground. And we've found good partners working with the Bronx Financial Access Coalition, and we want to continue working with the coalition. And I think we're always, again, we're mission driven. So you're asking before about, what's the difference between a bank and a credit union? That's the difference. Like, we have a mission to serve, and our mission is to serve low-income communities and communities of color with responsible financial services that build rather than extract wealth from communities. So we want to be doing that, and we want to be doing it more in the Bronx. And
one of the things that occurred to me as I was just kind of conceiving this concept, that here are housing organizations and they're working to help banking because people can't pay their rent if the money's being sucked out of them because they're paying fees. And then you don't have a healthy community. You can't keep doing what you do, et cetera.
Exactly, Gary. Like you hit the nail on the head, right? The traditional model that redlining is a piece of is extractive economy, which is where people on the outside see, like, how can we extract wealth out of that neighborhood and make people somewhere else rich? We know there's a lot of wealth in the Bronx, and it's consistently being extracted. So all of our partners that we're working with in the Bronx, Bronx-wide coalition, the folks working on the Armory, right, at Northwest Bronx Coalition, everyone, we all understand that this is the model out there, but that when we do it and own things ourselves through cooperative enterprises, like credit unions, like community land trusts, like affordable housing groups, right? Those are avenues to kind of build that local wealth and keep it here and help lift up through kind of this, sometimes we call it like economic democracy or collective shared wealth and ownership models. Right. And this is, it's another piece of that field that we think is the way to go. And the Bronx has been a leader in that going way back in time, as you know, right? With the first limited equity housing cooperative at Amalgamated, the first Mitchell-Lama Park Reservoir we were talking about before. We're leaders in that field, so we have to own that as our expertise as well and keep building that up.
I'll give you 30 seconds. What's the pitch to individuals who are saying, well, that was interesting. Do I do it? What do you want to tell them? And then you're going to get the same 30 seconds.
Okay.
Well, I'll just reiterate, we serve low-income.
You're going to get the final word. They're telling me time.
We serve low-income communities and communities of color. We serve seniors, and we do it the way it's supposed to be done, with responsible services that are affordable. In this time when everything else is so unaffordable in New York City, we're providing the affordable financial services that help communities thrive.
971.
941 Intervale Ave, right off the 2 and 5 train.
There you go. I looked at the map, and that's right where it is. Gentlemen, thank you for just doing the great work. Greg Jost, thank you so much. Andy Morrison, thank you.
Thank you.
And we thank everybody. Our producer is Rebecca Hemmick. Our director, Will Guzman. Urelis Encarnacion is on graphics. My buddy Ian Neville on audio. Editor is Yessi Diaz. We have a cast of thousands here in the studio. And of course, to you too, it is all about the people of the Bronx. So, curtain don't fall, the creek don't rise. We'll be here next week. Good.